Have you ever wondered why a man can seem deeply interested one day, then suddenly become distant the moment the relationship starts feeling real? It feels confusing. It feels personal. And if you have experienced it, you have probably asked yourself the same painful question over and over again. If he truly cares about me, why does he keep pulling away? The answer is often far more complicated than people realize. Sometimes distance is exactly what it looks like. But other times, distance is not the absence of love. It is the presence of fear. By the end of this video, you will understand why an avoidant man can act in ways that seem completely opposite to his feelings, and why the behaviors that hurt the most may actually reveal what is happening beneath the surface. One of the biggest misunderstandings about avoidant attachment is believing that love automatically creates closeness. For many people, that is true. Feeling safe with someone naturally leads to more openness, more communication, and a stronger emotional bond. But for someone with an avoidant attachment style, the opposite can happen. The closer they begin to feel, the more their inner alarm system quietly turns on. They may not even realize it is happening. They simply feel uncomfortable, overwhelmed, or trapped without fully understanding why. This is why the beginning of a relationship often feels so different from what comes later. At first, everything seems easy. He texts often. He makes plans. He appears interested. He enjoys your company. But then something changes. Maybe you share a deeply emotional conversation. Maybe the relationship becomes exclusive. Maybe he realizes that losing you would actually hurt him. Instead of becoming even closer, he suddenly becomes harder to reach. His replies become shorter. He seems distracted. He starts needing more space than before. For someone on the receiving end, this change feels heartbreaking. It creates confusion because his actions no longer match his earlier behavior. Many people immediately assume they did something wrong. They replay conversations in their mind. They search for mistakes. They wonder if they became too available or too emotional. But in many cases, the real shift happened inside him, not because of anything you did. Avoidant attachment is often built around one powerful belief that develops long before adult relationships begin. Deep down, emotional dependence can feel unsafe. Love can become connected with pressure instead of comfort. Vulnerability can feel risky instead of healing. As a result, genuine closeness activates old protective habits that were designed to prevent emotional pain. This creates a strange contradiction. The very connection he has been searching for suddenly becomes the thing that makes him anxious. He wants intimacy, but intimacy also makes him uncomfortable. He enjoys feeling close, but staying close feels emotionally overwhelming. He may not even understand why he feels the urge to step back. All he knows is that creating distance brings temporary relief. This explains one of the clearest signs of an avoidant in love. Right after moments of emotional closeness, he begins creating space. You spend an amazing weekend together. He disappears for several days. You finally have an honest conversation about your feelings. Suddenly he seems emotionally unavailable. You feel like everything was moving forward, but somehow the relationship starts moving backward. To someone without this attachment pattern, these reactions make very little sense. Love usually creates security, but for an avoidant, stronger feelings can activate stronger defenses. The closer the emotional bond becomes, the louder the internal discomfort can grow. That discomfort is rarely about you as a person. It is about what closeness represents inside his own emotional world. Another behavior that often confuses people is emotional inconsistency. One day he appears warm, affectionate, and fully present. The next day he seems cold or distracted. This inconsistency is not always manipulation. Sometimes it reflects an internal battle between two competing needs. One part of him wants connection because every human being naturally desires love and belonging. Another part fears losing independence, control, or emotional safety. These two forces constantly pull against each other. That inner conflict often creates mixed signals. He may initiate conversations but avoid discussing the future. He may miss you deeply but struggle to express it. He may enjoy spending time together while quietly resisting deeper commitment. His actions seem contradictory because his emotions feel contradictory. This does not mean every distant man has an avoidant attachment style. Some people simply lose interest. Others are emotionally unavailable for entirely different reasons. That is why understanding patterns matters much more than judging isolated moments. Anyone can have a stressful week or need personal space. The difference is consistency. An avoidant pattern repeats itself whenever emotional intimacy begins increasing. The closer the relationship becomes, the more predictable the emotional withdrawal becomes. This cycle leaves many partners trapped in self-doubt. They believe that if they become more patient, more understanding, or more loving, the distance will disappear. Unfortunately, avoidant attachment is rarely changed by someone else's effort alone. The problem is not a lack of affection. The problem is that affection itself can activate fear that has existed for years. Perhaps the most surprising truth is that an avoidant man often feels emotions much more deeply than he allows himself to show. Instead of expressing those feelings openly, he suppresses them. He convinces himself he needs less. He tells himself everything is fine. He focuses on work, hobbies, responsibilities, or distractions because staying busy feels safer than sitting with emotional vulnerability. From the outside, it looks like he does not care. Inside, he may simply be trying to quiet emotions that feel too overwhelming to face. This is why his silence can be so confusing. It is not always empty. Sometimes it is filled with feelings he has never learned how to process. Understanding this difference changes the way you see his behavior. It does not excuse hurtful actions, nor does it guarantee the relationship will succeed, but it reveals that love and distance can exist together inside an avoidant person, creating a painful emotional conflict that few people recognize until they understand the hidden psychology behind it. Why would someone who genuinely enjoys being close suddenly start acting like the relationship is becoming too much? At first, it can seem irrational. Everything appears to be going well, yet he begins responding more slowly, making fewer plans or acting emotionally flat. If you only look at his behavior on the surface, it feels like he is losing interest. But if you look beneath the behavior, you often find something very different. What changes is not always his feelings. What changes is the amount of emotional vulnerability the relationship begins to require. An avoidant attachment style is often shaped by experiences where emotional needs were not consistently welcomed or understood. Over time, the mind learns an important survival strategy. Instead of depending on others for comfort, it becomes safer to depend only on yourself. This strategy may work well during childhood because it reduces disappointment. The problem is that the same strategy quietly follows someone into adult relationships, where emotional closeness is necessary for lasting love. As the relationship grows deeper, something inside him begins to send mixed messages. One part of him enjoys the connection. He feels understood. He feels accepted. He starts imagining a future, even if he never says it out loud. At the same time, another part begins asking difficult questions. What if I lose my freedom? What if she expects too much from me? What if I cannot be the partner she deserves? What if I get hurt? These thoughts often happen automatically, without careful reflection. They create tension long before he fully understands what he is feeling. This is why commitment can feel surprisingly heavy for an avoidant person. It is not always the commitment itself that creates fear. It is everything commitment seems to represent: greater emotional responsibility, more vulnerability, more expectations, a greater chance of rejection if things fall apart. The closer someone gets, the more there is to lose. Instead of seeing intimacy as emotional safety, the avoidant mind may quietly interpret it as emotional risk. One of the most common signs is what happens after moments of deep vulnerability. Imagine the two of you finally have an honest conversation about your feelings. You both open up. You both feel closer than ever before. You leave the conversation believing the relationship has reached a beautiful new level. Then, without warning, he becomes distant. He seems unusually quiet. He takes much longer to reply. He suddenly says he needs time to think. This sudden withdrawal often leaves the other person feeling shocked. They believed emotional honesty would strengthen the relationship. Instead, it feels like honesty pushed him away. The reality is that emotional closeness activated an internal discomfort he was not prepared to manage. Creating distance becomes his way of calming that discomfort, even though it also damages the relationship. Another behavior many people notice is that he suddenly becomes extremely busy. Work demands more attention. Family responsibilities increase. New hobbies appear. His schedule somehow becomes full just as the relationship becomes more emotionally serious. Of course, everyone has real responsibilities, and being busy alone does not indicate avoidant attachment. The important detail is the timing. Emotional distance repeatedly appears whenever emotional closeness increases. Sometimes he even convinces himself that the relationship is moving too fast, despite previously enjoying the same level of closeness. He may begin focusing on small imperfections that never seemed important before. Tiny disagreements suddenly feel like major incompatibilities. Habits that once seemed charming now become reasons to question the relationship. This shift is not always a conscious attempt to leave. It can be the mind searching for logical explanations to justify emotional discomfort that feels difficult to explain. This is where many people become trapped in confusion. They believe they need to prove they are good enough. They become more patient, more forgiving, and more available. They try harder to remove every possible concern. Yet no amount of reassurance completely solves the problem because the fear is not being created by the relationship itself. The fear is being activated by old emotional patterns that existed long before the relationship began. Fearful avoidants experience an even more complicated struggle. Unlike dismissive avoidants who often lean toward emotional independence, fearful avoidants deeply crave connection while simultaneously fearing it. This creates an exhausting cycle. They move toward love because they want intimacy. Then they suddenly pull away because intimacy feels unsafe. After creating distance, loneliness appears. They miss the connection. They move closer again. Once closeness returns, anxiety rises, and the cycle repeats. To the person on the other side, these mixed signals can feel emotionally exhausting. One week he seems fully invested. The next week he feels impossible to understand. His affection appears genuine, yet his withdrawal also feels genuine. Both experiences are real because he is constantly switching between two emotional survival systems. One system seeks connection, the other seeks protection. Another subtle sign is his discomfort with emotional labels. He may care deeply about you, but hesitate when conversations become more defined. Questions about exclusivity, future plans, or long-term commitment may trigger hesitation rather than excitement. It is not necessarily because he does not value the relationship. Sometimes putting a label on the relationship makes everything feel more permanent, and permanence increases emotional pressure inside his mind. This inner conflict often creates a painful misunderstanding. You begin believing that if he truly loved you, commitment would feel easy. He begins believing that something must be wrong with the relationship because commitment feels so uncomfortable. Neither conclusion fully captures what is actually happening. His emotional system has learned to associate closeness with vulnerability instead of security. That does not mean every avoidant relationship is destined to fail. Real change is possible, but only when the avoidant person becomes aware of these hidden patterns instead of allowing them to quietly control every decision. Without that awareness, emotional withdrawal becomes automatic. It feels justified in the moment, even though it leaves both people feeling disconnected. The most difficult part is that genuine love does not erase avoidant attachment. In many cases, love actually activates it more strongly. The deeper the feelings become, the louder the protective instincts grow. This is why someone can miss you, care about you, think about you constantly, and still create distance at the very moment you expect greater closeness. Until that internal conflict is understood, the relationship can feel like an endless cycle of hope, confusion, closeness, and separation that neither person fully knows how to stop. One of the most confusing experiences in any relationship is watching someone walk away, only to return weeks or even months later as if nothing happened. If he needed so much space, why is he suddenly reaching out again? If he truly wanted the relationship to end, why does he keep coming back? These questions leave many people trapped in an emotional cycle they cannot explain. The answer often lies in the way an avoidant attachment system processes emotions, not in real time, but after distance has already been created. For many people, emotions become strongest while they are still in the relationship. They feel sadness during conflict. They miss their partner immediately after separation. They naturally seek comfort through connection. An avoidant person often experiences something very different. When emotions become too intense, the first reaction is not to move closer. It is to shut down. Creating distance brings temporary relief. The pressure fades. Difficult conversations stop. Emotional expectations disappear. For a while, it may even seem like leaving was the right decision. This period can be confusing because the avoidant person may appear completely unaffected. They continue working, socializing, following routines, and acting as though life has returned to normal. To the partner left behind, this silence feels like proof that the relationship never meant much. But emotional suppression is not the same as emotional absence. When someone repeatedly pushes emotions aside instead of processing them, those emotions often return later, once the immediate pressure has disappeared. After enough time has passed, the nervous system begins to calm down. Without constant emotional stimulation, memories slowly become easier to access. The moments of laughter, comfort, safety, and connection begin resurfacing. Instead of feeling trapped by intimacy, the avoidant person starts feeling the absence of intimacy. This delayed emotional response explains why some avoidants suddenly reach out after weeks of complete silence. It is not always because they have fully changed. It is often because they are finally feeling emotions they could not face while the relationship was active. That is why no contact creates such an interesting psychological effect. Many people believe no contact is simply a strategy to make someone miss them. In reality, its deepest effect is much more complicated. When communication stops completely, the emotional pressure also stops. There are no difficult conversations waiting, no expectations to meet, no constant reminders of unresolved conflict. Ironically, the absence of pressure can create enough emotional space for suppressed feelings to surface naturally. This does not guarantee that every avoidant will come back. Human behavior is never that predictable. Some people continue suppressing their emotions for years. Others move into new relationships without ever examining their attachment patterns. But for many avoidants, genuine emotional reflection begins only after enough distance allows their defensive system to relax. This is why their return often feels unexpected. One day, there is complete silence. Then suddenly there is a message, a simple question, a casual comment, a memory shared. Sometimes they react to an old photo or send something that reminds them of you. The message rarely begins with a dramatic confession of love. Instead, it often feels surprisingly ordinary. Underneath that ordinary conversation is something much deeper. They are testing emotional safety before allowing themselves to become vulnerable again. This is where many people misunderstand what returning actually means. Coming back is not the same as being emotionally ready. Missing someone is not the same as understanding why the relationship became difficult. Feeling lonely is not the same as healing old attachment wounds. An avoidant can sincerely miss you while still carrying the exact same fears that caused them to leave. If those fears remain untouched, the relationship often slips back into the same familiar cycle. Things feel wonderful at first. The connection grows stronger. Emotional intimacy increases. Then the internal alarm activates again and distance slowly returns. This repeating pattern is known as the push-pull cycle. The push happens when emotional closeness begins triggering fear. Instead of communicating that fear, the avoidant unconsciously creates space. The pull begins after enough distance has reduced emotional pressure. Once the nervous system settles, loneliness and emotional longing slowly return. The desire for connection grows stronger than the fear, leading them back toward the relationship. Unfortunately, this cycle can continue for years if neither person understands what is driving it. Another behavior that keeps many partners emotionally attached is breadcrumbing. Breadcrumbing happens when someone gives just enough attention to maintain an emotional connection without fully committing. A message every few weeks, a random compliment, a brief conversation that creates hope before disappearing again. These small moments feel meaningful because they interrupt long periods of silence. The human brain naturally searches for patterns. When affection becomes unpredictable, each small moment of connection feels unusually valuable. Instead of creating emotional security, inconsistency often creates stronger emotional attachment. You begin waiting for the next message, wondering when he will appear again, hoping this time things will finally be different. This emotional uncertainty can become more addictive than consistent affection. That does not always mean breadcrumbing is intentional. Some avoidants genuinely want connection, but become overwhelmed the moment it begins feeling emotionally real again. They reach out because they miss you. They disappear because closeness scares them. Both experiences are honest from their perspective, even though the inconsistency causes enormous pain for the other person. This is why actions matter more than temporary emotions. Anyone can feel lonely. Anyone can miss a familiar relationship. Anyone can remember the good moments after time has passed. The real question is whether those emotions lead to lasting emotional growth. Has he become more open? Can he communicate difficult feelings instead of disappearing? Does he accept responsibility for his patterns instead of blaming circumstances? Is he willing to remain emotionally present even when intimacy feels uncomfortable? These questions reveal far more than a simple return ever could. The hardest truth for many people to accept is that love alone cannot break the push-pull cycle. Strong feelings may bring someone back, but lasting change requires something much deeper. It requires recognizing the hidden fears that drive emotional withdrawal and choosing to respond differently instead of automatically escaping whenever vulnerability appears. Without that inner change, every reunion risks becoming another temporary chapter in the same unfinished story. The faces remain the same, the feelings remain real, yet the ending repeats itself because the invisible emotional pattern has never truly been broken. How can you tell the difference between a man who truly loves you but is afraid of intimacy and a man who simply enjoys your attention without wanting a real relationship? This is one of the most important questions you can ask yourself, because the answer can protect both your heart and your future. Many people spend months or even years trying to decode mixed signals, hoping that every small act of affection is proof that lasting love is just around the corner. But healthy relationships are not built on guessing games. They are built on emotional safety, consistency, and a willingness to grow together. An avoidant man who genuinely loves you may struggle to express his feelings, but over time, there should be signs that he wants to move toward the relationship instead of constantly running away from it. Progress may be slow. It may not be perfect. There may still be moments when he feels overwhelmed or needs space. The difference is what happens after those moments. Does he come back with honesty? Does he acknowledge that his distance hurt you? Does he try to explain what he experienced instead of pretending nothing happened? These small changes reveal something important. They show that fear is no longer completely controlling his actions. Real emotional growth is rarely dramatic. It usually happens through small, repeated choices. Instead of disappearing for weeks, he communicates that he needs time to process his emotions. Instead of avoiding difficult conversations, he stays present even when they make him uncomfortable. Instead of blaming you for wanting closeness, he begins recognizing that his own fears are part of the problem. These moments may seem ordinary, but they represent a major shift inside someone who has spent years protecting themselves through emotional distance. On the other hand, someone who has no intention of building a healthy relationship often repeats the same pattern without any desire to change. He disappears, returns, offers just enough affection to keep the connection alive, then disappears again. Every conversation feels hopeful, but nothing meaningful ever changes. The relationship stays trapped in the same cycle because the emotional work is never done. This is where many people become emotionally exhausted. They stop paying attention to patterns and start focusing only on possibilities. They remember the good days and ignore the difficult ones. They hold on to the version of him they hope he will become instead of accepting the version he consistently shows them. Hope is a beautiful part of love, but hope without evidence can quietly become emotional suffering. One of the healthiest questions you can ask yourself is not, does he love me? Instead ask, is he capable of building the kind of relationship I need right now? Those two questions are not the same. Someone can have genuine feelings for you and still lack the emotional skills required for a healthy partnership. Love is important, but love without emotional availability often creates confusion instead of security. Many people believe that if they are patient enough, loving enough, or understanding enough, they can heal another person's attachment wounds. While kindness and support matter, lasting healing is always a personal decision. No one can force another person to become emotionally available. They have to recognize their own patterns, accept responsibility for them, and actively choose to respond differently. Without that commitment, the same fears continue shaping every relationship they enter. This is why your own attachment style matters just as much as his. If you constantly chase someone who repeatedly withdraws, it is worth asking yourself another difficult question. Why does inconsistency feel familiar? Why does earning someone's love feel more natural than simply receiving it? Sometimes the relationship is not only revealing his emotional patterns, it is quietly revealing yours as well. Healing begins when you stop measuring your worth by someone else's ability to stay close. Your value has never depended on another person's readiness to love. An avoidant partner's fear of intimacy is not evidence that you are too much, too emotional, or not enough. It is evidence that they are struggling with an internal conflict that existed long before you entered their life. This realization changes everything. Instead of spending every day analyzing delayed text messages, emotional distance, or changing moods, you begin paying attention to something much more important. You start noticing how the relationship makes you feel. Do you feel respected? Do you feel emotionally safe? Can you express your needs without fear? Do your conversations leave you feeling understood, or do they leave you questioning your own reality? Healthy love does not require you to shrink yourself to make another person comfortable. It does not ask you to ignore your emotional needs or accept endless uncertainty. It creates space for honesty, accountability, and mutual effort. Even when challenges appear, both people remain committed to working through them rather than escaping from them. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about avoidant attachment is believing that understanding someone's fears means you must tolerate behaviors that repeatedly hurt you. Compassion and boundaries can exist together. You can understand why someone pulls away while also deciding that emotional inconsistency is not the kind of relationship you want. Those two truths do not cancel each other out. Sometimes the healthiest outcome is not convincing an avoidant person to stay. Sometimes it is allowing yourself to stop chasing someone who is not yet ready to build the relationship you deserve. Ironically, when you stop trying to rescue the connection at any cost, you begin reconnecting with yourself. You recover the emotional energy that was once spent overthinking every silence, every mixed signal, and every unanswered question. The deepest lesson is not simply learning how avoidants think, it is learning how secure love feels. Secure love is not perfect, but it is dependable. It allows two people to disagree without fearing abandonment. It allows vulnerability without shame. It creates trust through consistent actions rather than occasional emotional highs. It replaces confusion with clarity and anxiety with peace. If he consistently chooses growth over avoidance, honesty over silence, and connection over emotional escape, there is real hope for the relationship. But if the same cycle repeats without accountability, the most loving decision may be to stop waiting for potential and start choosing reality. In the end, the strongest sign of real love is not how intensely someone feels when they miss you. It is how consistently they choose you when closeness becomes uncomfortable. Feelings may begin a relationship, but emotional maturity is what allows love to survive. And the healthiest relationship you will ever experience is the one where both people are willing to face their fears instead of letting those fears quietly decide the future for them.